The live stream is running.
All right, I'd like to, let's go ahead and get started. I know folks are grabbing their food. If you're out in the narthex and want to come in to join the show, we invite you to. Welcome to those who are here, and welcome to those who are watching via YouTube. Welcome to our program, Crisis in the Holy Land, and what we can do in response to what's happening, and particularly what our Palestinian siblings are asking of us so that we can stand with them in solidarity. Let me begin by introducing myself. I'm Pastor Allison Tanner, pastor of Public Witness here at Lakeshore Avenue Baptist Church. Our congregation has, especially over the past 5 years, really listened intently to the cries of our Palestinian siblings and have found ways to commit ourselves to advocate alongside them as they seek, as they fight, as they work for their freedom, for justice, and for equality. And one of the other hats that I wear is that I am the coordinator of the Bay Area World Without Walls Coalition. And that is a network of folks in the Bay Area, people of conscience, several congregations and several organizations, Middle East Children's Alliance, Jewish Voice for Peace, Arab Resource and Organizing, Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity. We're a network of people of conscience who work together to challenge all walls of injustice and oppression, recognizing they are far too many and must be challenged. We're part of a global movement of hundreds of organizations internationally brought together originally 5 years ago by Palestinian and Mexican freedom fighters who called out to the international community to work with them intersectionally, challenging all walls of exclusion, exploitation, and expulsion. And so in response to this global call, the Bay Area community gathered together, and I tell you this because we usually gather every year right around November 9th. November 9th, just last Wednesday. And November 9th is a very significant day for this community, World Without Walls, because on November 9th, 33 years ago, November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. And so we gather on November 9th to remember that all walls of exclusion, expulsion, exploitation will come tumbling down, and we want to be part of the movement that helps bring them down. And one of the, at our last World Without Walls event in the Bay Area, we commissioned this mural behind you to be put together, and I thought it fitting to be at our event tonight. The mural we have hanging up was commissioned by Palestinian Bay Area artist Chris Khazala, and it was put together for our last event that really wanted to highlight the links between walls and cages, and very specifically the cages that are endured by our Black and brown brothers and sisters here in Oakland and the Bay Area, acknowledging the cages and the walls of our immigrant brothers and sisters who find themselves in detention although they have done no crime, and who find themselves caught up in these systems that seek to separate families and break spirits and create second and third class citizens. And we are challenging those walls, also recognizing Israel's apartheid wall that imprisons Palestinians in ever smaller places and restricts their freedom at every level. We recognize that these walls are connected, and so too must those who resist these walls work together in intersectional ways. And so you'll see in the mural as well, on the right, communities of resistance led by people who are directly impacted, but also invitational to invite anyone who would be part of a community of a resistance to these walls of racism, of discrimination, of oppression, and of injustice. And it is fittingly then against this backdrop that we gather tonight to hear from Reverend Dr. Don Wagner, longtime Palestinian activist, and only because I'm so much newer to the group and I look up to you, might I call you elder of the Christian community. An elder of the community in the sense that you have paved the way for younger advocates in the work we have to do, and the communities of resistance as we seek to continue the work that you have been doing for so long. Don Wagner was recently in Palestine, and so he's going to share with us some of his recent travels, some of his new memoir, Glory to God in the Lowest, a pilgrimage to an unholy land, and to hear from him a little bit more about the work that we can do to connect again to the work of freedom, justice, and equality for all people. And I'm going to call you up in just a minute, Don, but I do want to draw your attention to the candles on the stand here. In the Christian tradition, at the beginning of November, we celebrate All Saints' Day. And I want to recognize, first of all, huge thanks to NorCal Sabeel for providing the food and helping host this event and publicize it. I want to recognize the saints of the NorCal Sabeel community, specifically John Erickson and Nabil Wabeh, recognizing that they have gone before us and have led a powerful example that we continue to follow in and walk in. So let me call their presence into this space as well. And now, Don, Pastor Don, civil rights leader, former professor of Middle East Studies and director of the Center for Middle East Studies at North Park University in Chicago, former national program director of FASNA, and many other great titles. We welcome you, and we look forward to hearing from, learning from, and talking with you. It is our 1880 pulpit.
Well, thank you, Allison, for that most generous welcome, and so great to be with you all. And you've really set the tone wonderfully for what we're doing. How's the sound? We okay? Okay, as long as I can remember. Remind me if I drop it. Yeah, okay, okay, I'll avoid licking it. Okay, well, I want to thank the co-sponsors, the photos from for the food, and just the space, and the real strong sense of justice. I was so impressed by both the cross and then the mural. I had to take a picture to show friends back in Chicago. So I'll be heading back there tomorrow, and I hear it's snowing. So got a few more hours of semi-warmth here. Okay, well, what I'd like to do is to share some experiences from a trip. My wife Linda and I got back on the 20th of October, so we were fairly recent. And then my friend Michael Yoshi was there at the same time. We kept missing each other, so he's going to add a few comments from his experience at the same time. So I'm going to do that first. Then I'm going to share a few reflections from my memoir, Glory to God in the Lowest, maybe even talk about the title and why. Journeys to an Unholy Land. I'm recommending that's what it is. We should call it that. And then finally, a few suggestions for advocacy and action. So those are my 3 points. So first, Linda and I were there for 2 full weeks on the ground. And it's always invigorating, been challenging to be in Palestine. And this was right on the eve of a lot of campaigning in the Israeli election, but also a lot of increase of resistance, including violent resistance. So we were able to move around, but the situation was tense. You could feel it, you could hear it, touch it. We were able to go everywhere we had planned, except to the north, where there was active resistance by a new group called Lion's Den. And understandably, there was armed resistance coming from youth who have had enough of knowing nothing but an oppressive apartheid-like situation. And who knows how many have lost fathers, brothers, and sisters in prison, how many had their homes demolished, and just have had enough. So violence is understandable. I'm committed to a nonviolent resistance, but I totally understand and will not judge why people feel in self-defense they must resist with armed struggle. So that is going on now. Of course, Israel clamped down with a serious military appraisal and curfew. So we could not go to Nablus. We could not go to Jenin up in the far north because those were simply not safe. But we were able to go to Hebron, walk down Shuhada Street where Israel shut down all the markets and they still are not open. And as we exited, we saw something new, a large surveillance camera doing facial recognition, which is expanding now by the Israelis to control the population. We went to the South Hebron Hills, went to 2 communities, Bedouin communities. One was just demolished for I don't know how many times, 135. But we went to 2 where this UNRWA activist, who's Palestinian, has been given time to work with local communities to build a school, raise the money, and build a school so that the people will stay there and have something, because they have very little. I went out in the basketball court and tried to shoot a few hoops with kids who were running barefoot, playing, just dirt poor, but just so excited, just to have that little court. And now they're building a new school for that village. So we saw that kind of activism, which goes on under the radar all the time. We met with several people who are just fed up, tired, exhausted, which is understandable, and Palestinians, that is. Met with progressive Jewish activists who feel a bit beleaguered. They've had zero influence, but they are not giving up. And then other creative activists like Omar Harami from Sabil, Jerusalem, who is doing amazing, out-of-the-box thinking. They've developed West Bank Palestinians don't have medical insurance. So they have pulled together doctors and nurses. They're putting some money in, and they're developing their own healthcare system. It's small, but they got about 10,000 people already in it, and it's going to expand and hopefully eventually involve many more of the poor Palestinians who don't have health care. And there's a lot of unemployed physicians, Palestinians driving taxis, who are giving time and service to this. So there's amazing things going on. There's Bible studies being done out in some of the poor villages using liberation theology in base communities like was done in Latin America, some including Muslims and Christians together, looking at the Quran and the Bible, finding ways to draw strength to resist and to stay. So there's lots going on, and it's a very complex situation. But I think the takeaway that we hear most in the news right now is the new Israeli government and that election. And I just thought an analogy would be as if all the Trump people and the ultra-white nationalists in the United States had won all the seats that were in the United States contested recently. That's what has happened in Israel. The situation is moving farther and farther to the ultra-nationalist, fascist right. And the Ben-Gvirs and others are now going to be driving more policy, let alone we have Netanyahu back. We visited Sheikh Jarrah, and some of you may know this is a section of Jerusalem where Israel is trying to force through settlers and the military Palestinians who have been in that housing since the late 40s out. There are houses, there's one family where settlers moved in and took over the first floor. Imagine. They took over the first floor, moved in, and the Palestinian family has to put up with that kind of abuse. And they're protected by the Israeli police and the Israeli Defense Forces, the military. Ben-Gvir himself, the leader of this far right-wing movement, has set up an office in a tent. We went by and we saw it. You may have too. And there are nights where he will be there or in the afternoon, making life miserable for the family that owns that house. And one night he started shooting his gun off in the middle of the night to terrorize the areas around them. So this is what's going on, backed by the government, and it's going to increase and get worse. So, the old Dickens thing, the best of times, the worst of times, this is the worst of times and it will get worse. And this is what they were saying. This is what Palestinians fear. So we have to really step up our solidarity to be with them. My wife Linda's Palestinian, and some land was passed down to her, so one of the reasons we were there was to work on that land. And I've told this to a couple of you, but her father died in '77. Her brother and sister are not interested, so she is she has the deed in her name now. So it's been passed down to her, stamped and official by the village of Petunia, where her dad was from. So 2 years ago, she went in to try to see the land, and because the land is in Area C, which is all Israeli controlled, she had to go to get approval by the military to go and see her own land. And when she went in and produced the document, the military officer said, "Oh, you don't own this land anymore." She said, "What? Here's my signature. Here's my father's signature. It's authenticated." And he said, "No, we're sorry. A settlement company has taken that land." He said, "What?" They forged her father's signature. It's a bad forgery. Her father died in '77, and the forgery was done in 2010. Now that has to be fought in courts. And we both say, this is a losing proposition. We're never going to win. But she says, just for the principle of it, I honor my father and my mom. I am going to fight this no matter what. So we are fighting it. And we saw our attorney. He's the same attorney for the Tent of Nations, which also is at risk. And he said, you know, for Area C, Israel has appointed 26 judges. 24 of the 26 are settlers. There is no way you can win. But he said, just by the stroke of luck, or maybe we would say providentially, she got one of the two that is not a settler. So there's a slight chance, maybe a 10% chance to win this case. But she is one of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, most of whom can't afford to fight it, who are losing their land by the same kind of forgery or all kinds of other tricks. So this is what's coming, and who knows, maybe they'll appoint 2 more settlers to replace the semi-moderate ones, and the land will be gone. So the theft of land is going to accelerate. So this is just a few random comments of what we saw and experienced about the worst of times are going to get worse. Now let me shift a little bit to my memoir, and just a few thoughts of, well now, what is it, 43 years of work on Palestine? Yeah, definitely an elder, but still very much a learner. You know, every time, every day, there's something new. So to talk about my journey, I'm going to reflect, and I've got it in the front of one of the chapters. Mark Twain once said, education consists mainly of what we unlearn. And this has been my experience with this. I grew up in a very, very conservative Republican, first on a farm in Buffalo, New York, outside Buffalo. My dad went to war when I was 6 months old. I didn't see him for 3.5 years. And my mom and I moved in with my grandparents, very simple farmers. My grandfather, a Norwegian immigrant, and they raised me. And they were very loving, warm, and my grandfather and I were always very, very close. I got a picture of Grandpa and me in the back of the book, and he was really one of my real heroes. Grandma was a little bit racist, she was just loving and caring, but occasionally some racist remarks would come out, and Grandpa always corrected her. He would not stand for it. And he always hired Puerto Rican and blacks and paid them well for the farm work. Well, Grandpa and Grandma every night would shut things down, open their Bible, and have Bible study at 8 o'clock, and their Schofield Bible. How many know what a Schofield Bible is? Okay, there's a few. It is a type of theology, this end-time rapture theology, in an outline laid over the text of the Bible, so it kind of skews your learning. You think all history is moving toward the end of history, Jesus' return, the rise of the Antichrist. And how many have heard of the rapture? You know what the rapture is? Okay, so I was raised in that. Eventually, my dad comes back, and I continued to believe those things and went off to college. My dad was very active in the Republican Party. He was the treasurer of the Republican Party of Western New York and a big fan of Barry Goldwater. And so 1964, I was so apolitical, I didn't even vote. My dream was to play professional baseball. I went to college to have fun and play sports, and I did. And then finally, about my senior year, I got into a good theology and philosophy course and got turned on academically, really for the first time. And I also realized, well, I'm not that great. I had offers to go play with the Cardinals and the lower minors and decided, no, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'll be riding buses the rest of my career and leave it and have nothing. So what am I going to do? I can coach. My senior year, I had no idea. So nothing else to do, so I went to seminary. And I had a couple of friends who also went. And I went to Louisville Seminary for the first year and fell in love with theology and all of that. And then transferred to Princeton. And Princeton, a much larger, diverse theological seminary, but I landed there in '66. So it was the height of Vietnam War protests. And so I began to attend a lot of those sessions and found myself slowly being won to an anti-war position. And my dad was so upset. I mean, he wouldn't talk to me for at least a month. And so there was a tension that was eventually resolved, thankfully, with my dad. So a group of seminary and university students decided to go to an anti-war conference in Washington, D.C. in spring of '67. It was March. So I went down to that. And catch this lineup of speakers. It opened with William Sloane Coffin, who was a chaplain at Yale and a tremendous, powerful speaker on the anti-war movement. Andrew Young eventually became mayor of Atlanta, the United Nations, lost his job because he just happened to talk to a PLO leader. But Andrew Young was a phenomenal speaker. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, the leading Jewish theologian of that era, and Martin Luther King. So I heard the theology and the politics and just became very involved in the anti-war movement. So I was beginning to get my consciousness raised, totally different, unlearning what I had been brought up with in some ways. I took a course on liberation theology, and there was a theologian by the name of Richard Schall, who was one of the newer liberation theologians. And I was still rather evangelical in my orientation. And Schall passed out the syllabus, and I looked down the readings, and you started with the Red Book of Chairman Mao, Marx and Engels, Man-Child in the Promised Land, Martin Luther King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail and other writings, and a few Bible verses. So that really scrambled my thinking, my theology, and more unlearning. And I began to gravitate to liberation theology. I also got involved in the civil rights movement, and my first church out of seminary was an all-black congregation in Newark, New Jersey. And I had been a field education doing weekends up in Newark, working with a guy named Reverend Joseph L. Roberts. And Joe Roberts went on and became pastor of the Martin Luther King, the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta for 30 years. But I was with him, an amazing, powerful speaker who was my mentor. And that congregation just helped me work through my white privilege, move to an anti-racism position, and realize as a white male, I will always be a recovering racist. It's like alcoholism. I'll always be in recovery, and I need to be in dialogue with black sisters and brothers to keep me honest and keep my consciousness attuned. So I realized all these things, and that church mentored me. And I believe that church prepared me for Palestine. I was still very much into another kind of Christian Zionism. You ever hear of the mainline Protestant and Catholic Christian Zionism? It grew out of the post-Holocaust theology, and understandably, to stand with Jews everywhere to fight anti-Semitism. But sometimes, we were told, and I was part of that, our black church had a relationship with a synagogue in Newark. And the chief rabbi was a leader of the Zionist movement in the U.S., Joachim Prince. And we were told, we need you to stand with us as Jews, to stand against anti-Semitism, because we are the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel is our only Jewish state, and we must preserve it, and especially you blacks need to stand with us, because we stood with you during civil rights. But don't take up the Palestine issue. Let us do that. And we call that now the ecumenical deal. Check Palestine at the door, Don't bring it in. We'll have wonderful dialogues and dinners, but leave Palestine to us. You might move into a little anti-Semitism if you get involved. And we call that PEP, P-E-P, Progressive Accept Palestine. So I was into that. And I remember driving, I had a call to another church. I remember driving across country, pulling a trailer, and it was 73, October 73. Remember what was going on? October War. And Israel was losing that war, the initial 3-4 days. And I remember stopping, listening to the radio, and then praying for Israel and Israel's victory. That's how deeply I was committed. Then I came to a new church in Evanston, Illinois. And my first assignment was to meet with the church and society, kind of your responsibilities, and adult education, and try to revive, kind of a dying adult ed program in the church. So it was January when we opened that and had our meeting, and some of you are old enough to remember sitting in gas lines. Remember that? Okay. Some of you are too young for that. But we figure with all this anger, all the hatred toward the Arabs, let's do a course on it. So we decided to do it, and a fellow who proposed it was named Bill Klein. He was a fundraiser for Northwestern University, which is just 4 blocks from our church. But Bill said, let's focus on the Palestine issue. Because all we get from our media and from our legislators is Israel. He said, as a church, we should be able to look at those who have suffered the most and focus on them. Well, that made me a little nervous because I was still so much of a Zionist. So I said, okay, let's balance this out. Now we believe, I believe there's no balance in this conflict. That's the myth of normalization and balance. I might need some water. So, I got a bottle right here. I got it. Thanks to Allison, we were prepared for this. Okay, so we started the course, and I brought in the Israeli Consul General, brought in the big guns, and he gave a passionate defense of Israel. The little David surrounded by Goliath. The little David surrounded by Goliath, the vulnerable one who needs your support as Christians, especially. So I was thrilled with what he said, and he kind of hit all the notes I was expecting. The next week, Bill Klein brought in Dr. Ibrahim Abalugod. He was the chair of political science at Northwestern. He, a Palestinian who was forced out of Gaza, and he told that story of the Nakba. As a teenager and his family leaving everything behind, never allowed to go back. And they were among the 750 to 800,000 Palestinians who were forced out, many killed, and became the refugees. I had never heard that. I didn't know about the Nakba. And it kind of scrambled my narrative. So this is a key thing, to unlearn, and sometimes we have to study and think about the narrative we have accepted on this issue or on immigrants or others. What kind of narrative have we bought in? What are our assumptions? That put a spoke in the wheel of that narrative, my Zionist narrative, for the first time. I didn't buy it fully, but that was the beginning. Well, anyway, I began to meet with Abalugod and some others and a couple progressive Jews and totally shifted by the end of that course. And then they said, you've got to go see for yourself. And that changed me. So anyway, this is my journey. And I call it glory to God in the lowest, not in any hierarchical sense, but to stand with the oppressed, to stand with those at the margins in solidarity and let them be our teachers. to stand with them and see what they're going through. And this is the unlearning. I want to read a quote that I put in front of one of the chapters from Marcel Proust. This kind of summarized it for me. The only true voyage, the only bath in the fountain of youth, would be not to visit strange lands, but to possess other eyes, to see the universe through the eyes of another, of 100 others, to see the 100 universes that each one of them sees, that each one of them is, and this we will do with great artists. And artists like these will teach us to really fly from star to star. So that is my journey. I've been mentored by beautiful people from all walks of life in Palestine and refugee camps and beyond. Beautiful Jewish progressive sisters and brothers who are willing to pay the price for justice. So this has been kind of the journey I'm on. My wife, Linda, didn't like the title, so she tried to talk me out of it. She's one of my editors. So she said, I don't get this. She's a secular Muslim. She doesn't really get the theology. So I've tried to explain it a few times. She says, I still don't like it. But for me, I mean, it's taking, when the Annunciation comes, when Jesus is born, glory to God in the highest, peace on earth. Well, Jesus' whole life was to the lowest, to those who needed healing, hugging and being with and healing the lepers, being with those who had maybe lost their homes, being with the ill, raising the status of women around him. So he stood and was in full solidarity. And one of my favorite texts is Matthew 25. Were you there when I was thirsty? Did you give me something to drink? When I was in prison, did you visit me? Now you could add today, when my house was demolished, were you there to stand with me in that pain? When my son or daughter was in prison and tortured, were you there to comfort and try to get them released? Even though you do it to the least of these, my sisters and brothers, you do it to me. So Matthew 25, this is kind of our marching orders. Well, let me turn then to a few things we can do. How are we doing on time, Catherine? 3. Oh, well, this will be fast. Okay, so I may take a couple more. So first, here are just a couple random things, and Michael will add a few, and then we can hear from you. You will have things to suggest of what we can do about this crisis, that's going to be worse. First, I think we need to shine a light on the Israeli project of Zionism. Expose it, critique it, and realize what its goals are. Its goals are to replace the Palestinians by whatever means possible. And Netanyahu realizes now that this is a time where he can close the deal. Annex possibly Area C, take the rest of East Jerusalem, force the settlers in, and get away with it. Biden does not seem to have the backbone to stand up to him. And we're going to see a lot of Democrats, some progressives, trying to normalize what it is. We need to shine a light on it. I learned that from my friend Cecily Sarosky, the great communications leader and one of the first leaders of JVP. Shine a light on it. Expose it. Tell the truth about what's happening. And don't back down until you expose it in the light. So another thing, I think, with all this normalization, and you know it's already coming, Israel is forcing in states, legally, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. You know, it's a definition of anti-Semitism, much of which we can agree with, but there's at least one point, maybe two, that basically say criticism of Israel can be anti-Semitism. That is a complete violation of our free speech. This is now passed in a number of states. Maryland just passed it on Wednesday. It's coming here. So we're going to have to stand and resist that and expose it. Groups like JVP are going to be critical. The churches are going to have to stand. Pay a price, but stand for the truth. Another is to protect BDS. The most powerful tool I think we have at the moment is boycott, divestment, and sanctions. There are lists of over 300 Israeli corporations and products that are either made in settlements on stolen Palestinian land and are essentially illegal according to international law. So that list, what is the, I forget the website. Again. Well, BDS movement has them, but also, who profits? You can see the whole list. Sabra Hummus, Hewitt-Packard, Motorola, Caterpillar. You know, the list goes on. Now we have 6 churches, I think, who have taken a stand on this, and there need to be more. But that has to come down to the local level to resist and fight that. And there's legislation now in 35 states to declare BDS illegal. And, you can't, many universities are vulnerable. Organizations that take state funds are vulnerable. So this is, again, an infringement on our free speech. I mean, Israel has used boycott. The whole civil rights movement used boycott and divestment. The South Africa Liberation Movement used it. But Palestine? Why does it have to be different? So we're going to have to fight for that. Another thing we saw firsthand was the whole issue of detention and torture of children. Every night, on an average, 2 children, 18 years and younger, are picked up by the Israeli military. I'll give you one case that just happened while we were there, and we know the family. A young boy, 16 years old, Shadi Khoury, 16-year-old student at the Friends School in Ramallah. The Israeli military surrounded the house at 5 a.m., broke down the door, came into his bedroom, grabbed him, of course, woke him up, kept his parents in another room, forced him to take his clothing off. He refused, so they started beating him, broke his nose, dragged him out of the house, threw him in a jeep, and a trail of blood followed him. 4 other Muslim kids were picked up the same night. Nobody knows, but there's a lot of speculation on why. He was not involved politically. But it is to get information out of him, possibly, on other youth who are involved. But many think it's to get information out of him about his parents. His mom and dad direct the Edward Said Orchestra, where Israeli children, youth, and Palestinians play music and tour. Israel does not want to see Palestinians in such a cultured sense. They do not want to see young Jews and Palestinians together creating something beautiful and powerful like that. And his parents the house was ransacked 2 years ago to try to get information to shut this down. So this is not by accident. And the Palestinian Authority picked Shadi up a month ago, beat him up to try to get information. They're doing the collaborating and the dirty work with Israel, the Palestinian government. So that is a case that you could pick up and work on right now. We need people to put pressure on Israel and to put pressure on actually our own State Department to take a stand on this. So I think it's H.R. 2590. Make sure your member of the House is on this, raising their voice. and you're going to have to remind them. I was in Atlanta last week and spoke, and there was a architect there who, a archaeologist who was a Quaker who heard about this for the first time, got excited about doing something, organized a delegation, and went in and met with John Ossoff's office last Wednesday, Ossoff the senator, and we talked, and I know the parents, so we hooked up Shadi's mother by Zoom with Ossoff's office so she could tell the story, and they heard that connection. You could do that. So this is the kind of thing. But H.R. 2590 is a bill before Congress. I think there are now 35 legislators on it, calling for an end to this practice, this inhumane, cruel practice of kidnapping and torturing children, because it's a violation of international law. And by the way, it's against U.S. law. The Leahy Amendment and the U.S. Arms Export Control Act says any country receiving U.S. funds, military and foreign assistance, cannot violate international law and human rights. This is a clear violation, and they're getting away with it. Okay, well, I'll kind of stop with that because I'm well over time. The alarm just went off. And I'd like to end with a couple things, then turn it over to Michael, right? Okay, so as a Christian, I feel this is a calling, and this is a case in the unholy land where we have to stand with those who are oppressed. And that is both progressive Jews, but mainly the Palestinians who are victimized by this apartheid system. Oh, let me add something while I'm on apartheid. There's a new movement emerging, and you're going to hear more about this, there are tools being created, toolkits and study, for local groups to work on creating apartheid-free communities. You probably know about this. And imagine how this church could declare itself an apartheid-free church or community. We need to go to synagogues, which will be a tougher call, but we count on JVP and many others. I know we'll get one in Chicago right away with Brant Rosen's Zedek Synagogue, a very close friend of ours. So, but imagine apartheid-free synagogues in solidarity with Palestinians who are living in an apartheid fascist system under Israel, taking land, kidnapping children, apartheid really on steroids. So we can go to mosques, universities, city councils. So that is another action suggestion we can do. So let me, H.R. 2590? Yeah, H.R. 2590. And it's really working in collaboration with Defense of Children, the Quakers. Most denominations, JVP, American Muslims for Palestine, are all on board with this. But we really need to step it up now. And now is the right time with Netanyahu knowing whatever he's going to do is going to be extreme. So we feel hopeless, we feel small at times, and I'm going to close with two little, illustrations. I take a great deal of hope from the widow and the unjust judge in Luke's gospel, a parable Jesus teaches. Jesus said, one day there was this unjust judge who feared neither God nor respected people. That says a lot. Maybe we have a few of those. And there was a widow who had been violated. We don't know what the crime was. But the widow came before the judge every day, pounding on his door, demanding, "Give me justice." And he ignored her. Pretty soon she kept coming. Day after day, she was relentless. And finally, the unjust judge says, "Give her justice. She's annoying me. Just give her justice. She's wearing me down." That's who we have to be on this issue. And finally, I'd like to tell a little story of our friend Mazen Kamsia, who many of you know. Mazen is a professor. You probably knew him in the East Coast when he was at Yale teaching. And he went back to Palestine to get involved in making change. He's passionately committed to nonviolent resistance, but totally understands armed struggle as well as necessary. So he was helping a Palestinian community in Wallija, which is on the other upper side of Beit Jala. And Wallija was, the people from Wallija were forced out of their homes in 1948. So they've settled in this village outside Bethlehem. Now Israel is building the wall coming right through Wallija and started demolishing homes. So Mazen and another professor began to go and sit in front of bulldozers to stop, the aggression. And they knew it was a losing proposition. So one day, my wife and I were with Mazen. We're staying with he and his wife, Jessie. And Linda said, Mazen, you've been arrested so many times. What was your favorite experience? And he laughed. He said, oh my God, I've never had that question. So he said, well, let me just tell you one of my many favorites. So he said, so we were sitting in front of bulldozers that were coming up, and then pretty soon the military surrounded us. They bound our hands and tied us with those plastic handcuffs which cut into your hands. They bound our feet and dragged us away, so we were all sitting there just waiting for being trucked away in an Israeli lorry. So Mazen was sitting there, a hot, dusty day, and he started singing. And the commander came over and said, stop singing, you're really annoying me. So Mazen stopped for a few minutes, and the military guy went away and phoned into his superior officers, what are you going to do with these crazy people? So Mazen started whistling. And he was whistling away and just sitting there. The guy comes over, my God, what are you doing? Shut up. Stop the whistling. You're just really annoying me. So he went away. Then Mazen started humming. And the guy came over, okay, and he pointed his gun at him. And Mazen said, what are you going to do? Kill me? Go ahead. Are you going to kill me for singing and for humming? I am more at peace than you are. You've got all these weapons, all this power. You've got the most nuclear weapons in the Middle East. I have nothing, but I'm at peace. And I knew myself, and I'm more secure right now than you are. You are filled with fear. And the guy just stopped. He walked away and didn't do anything. But Mazen was grounded and centered in resistance, using creative, impromptu methods just to let them know we're human beings. We are equal, and we're not going to stop. Thank you very much. Let me introduce my dear friend, Michael Yoshi, who you all know. Let me turn this over now to Michael Yoshi, a tremendous activist who's led many delegations with the Methodists and will be going back many, many times. He's retired to do more of this work, I'm sure. We just missed each other. We're trying to get together when we were there at the same time. So he has some other observations, I think, that he can make to kind of complement what I tried to articulate. Michael?
Thanks, Don. I'll see what I can do here. I was joking when I was coming into the space today because Don and I were in Palestine. I got back October 24th. 20th? I know I got back on the 24th because I had to get back for my grandson's birthday on the 25th. He was turning 4 years old. But anyway, while we were there, we were emailing almost every day. And I said, where are you going to be today, Don? He said, well, I'll be in Jerusalem tomorrow. And I said, well, we're going to go to Jerusalem tomorrow too, so maybe I'll meet you there. And then we were trying to figure out, and he said, no, we're going to Bethlehem the next day, and then we'll be in Ramallah. And so we're trying to figure it out, and we just could never hook up. And it's so ironic we're meeting here in Oakland, right? Which is my Bay Area hometown. I grew up in Berkeley, West Berkeley. And in fact, I spent the day today with my 101-year-old father. He was from Oakland. And his father had a restaurant on Grand in San Pablo, if you know the neighborhood. It was a restaurant called The Palace that existed until 1942 when they were taken away to mass incarceration, his family to Topaz. And my grandfather was there for the duration. And so their restaurant didn't exist after that. And part of my connection, I think, to Palestinian narrative is my own family history and just the history of erasure of communities, of dislocation, dispossession. My mother's family was from Fresno, and they lost their farm. And that's sort of another connection I have with Palestinians around being a farm background, and connecting to farmers. One of the hats I do wear, I'm a United Methodist clergy. I retired 2 years ago from Northern California, Nevada conference after serving in the conference here for 36 years or so. I wear the hat of being co-chair of Friends of Wadi Fouquin, which is a partnership with the Palestinian village in the West Bank near Walaja. It's a little bit southwest of Walaja, right on the Green Line. And I just met Jesse tonight, who I'm waking up right now. Because Jesse's going to go on the next Friends of Wadi Fouquin trip next April, correct? He told me he went to the orientation meeting. I think they have about 15 people who've signed up already. They're hoping to get about 25 folks to go on that trip. And our commitment to the village that we started the partnership in 2009 was to support community development projects, to bring people at least once a year on exposure trips to the region and particularly to the village, and then to do advocacy work as they request of us along the way. The trip I went on was not a Friends of Wadi Fouquin trip, but it was Eyewitness Palestine, who we've been doing, Friends of Wadi Fouquin has been doing some work with over the pandemic. They helped host some virtual tours for us with Friends of Wadi Fouquin and asked me to co-lead a trip that they had already been planning with a co-leader from San Francisco State, Leslie Quintanilla, who is a professor there. And so it was a real privilege to work with them. It was a privilege to work with Eyewitness Palestine. They did so much work to prep people. There was a great group of activists who are already just well aware of the Palestinian issue. And all of them going for the first time, though, and choosing to go with Eyewitness Palestine on this particular trip. And they had a really ambitious itinerary set up, and similar to the places that Don went to. And we had to cancel out on Nablus. We were planning to go to Nablus because of the activity going on. We were told that the hotel we were going to stay at, the next door, was raided kind of a couple weeks before the trip, and that they were going to shift that itinerary. We went to Masafer Yatta. Our contact there, that morning we went, his name was Hamoudi, from the village of Tawani there in Masafer Yatta. It was touch and go, because he was saying, we're going to be organizing an action today, and you have to see kind of what's happening when you get there. And when we arrived, there was a flying checkpoint that had gotten set up. There was another bus, a tour bus, that was getting pulled over, and then we pulled out and talked to Hamoudi, and he said, well, we could go around another route and then get into the village, but I don't know, that might not be the best thing. And our tour guide suggested we kind of pass on this, because we had some folks that were a little bit elderly, and said that, if we get caught in the middle of things, people might not be able to run for it to get to the bus. So we passed on it, and then about 20 minutes later, Hamoudi texted me and says, well, it's a good thing you didn't go, because there were more police that came in. They came in with tear gas, and then they were trying to bust up. They had a big protest plan, because I think they had been working on stuff for a few weeks and just landed on that particular day. So for our group, we had a good kind of debriefing on the bus about situations like this. Half the folks on the bus wanted to go. They said, that's why we're here. Why are we not going there? And other folks were saying, thank you for keeping us safe. And we had to kind of debrief our different reactions to things that are going on. But he sent us an article. In fact, it was published, I think, in Mondoweiss, about his father having been arrested in September on false charges of attacking a settler who had actually attacked him. And so they had to reverse that. It sounds like you read the article, Catherine. And so he was just commenting in his article about how after the dust had settled, he picked up a tear gas canister and he saw it being made in America, made in the U.S. And just his article was all about, hey, this is your money, folks, and please, tell your people this is the kind of thing you're supporting, and so please be on it, We also had to cancel out on our visit to Al Aida refugee camp, the Laji Refugee Center, because that day was a general strike. And they told us they're closing down, and there was going to be an action there also. And but on that day, Badil was open, so they told us come on by. And so we had a great meeting with the staff of the Badil Resource Center about the right to return and kind of great resources that they have on documenting all of the refugees around the world, and kind of a great map in their space around where all the refugees are located, and really urging people to think more about the right of return. It's part of the BDS platform, but a lot of people seem to kind of just put it aside on the back burners, but we really need to be talking about that, and that was underscored when we went to visit the village of Lifta, which is in Israel, but west of Jerusalem, and it was depopulated in '48, and we had a really great tour by a man named Umar, I'm forgetting his last name, but he's working with Zokrat, the Israeli organization that's documenting much of '48 and displacement. And working together with them, he said that there's a Lifta right of return committee that actually has helped stop them building homes there. And they've turned Lifta into a national park, of course, similar to what they've done with some of the depopulated villages up in the Galilee area, up in the north, and kind of the rebranding of villages into Israeli kinds of national sites and so forth. And so they were talking to that they have an active committee for the right of return, that we should think about that on our agenda as well. We did meet with the folks at Al-Haq to talk about the organizations that have been tagged as terrorists, and we had representatives, I think, from DCIP that day, Adamir and Al-Haq, to talk about what they're doing around the situation and how they had all been raided and shut down, I think it was August or so, and how they've been doing their work and continue to support different groups on the ground as they do their work. So we had a similar kind of itinerary, I think, as Don had had, and also we were just picking up on the organized armed resistance as well that you referred to, and we didn't get a good chance to have a full conversation about it, but I think we had enough side conversations about many of us, talking about how we need to support people in the diverse tactics of resistance. And if people want to pick up arms, and that's their right to do so. It reminds me when I was growing up here in the Bay Area and the Black Panthers were getting organized. And Black Panthers are being tagged as these troublemakers, violent people or so forth, but people had arms and it was their right to do so. And folks that have arms, they're getting targeted, and this is part of what's going on right now. That's the conflict that's happening, and people are getting killed. And I think October was one of the largest months of killings in the West Bank that we've seen for several months. But I think Christians, particularly where we tend to be on the pacifist side for the liberals, and on the nonviolent side for those who identify as being progressives, also, I believe, need to embrace those who need to arm themselves, to defend themselves, because it's self-defense. And we need to really flip around how people get tagged as being terrorists because they have an arms. I mean, why are we not calling the state of Israel a state terrorist organization? Actually, we should be calling it that because that's what it is. And so the language that people use, and I believe the ways in which conversations get played out, marginalize people who are already marginalized. And we need to flip that around completely and really affirm and stand in solidarity with people who are trying to resist things by whatever means they need to do, and to not marginalize people further as we hear about these stories. Because also we're not getting the stories that are really happening as they are happening, and that's part of our task too. I just want to say a word. I know we want to get to some collective conversation, but one of the first things I did when I came back from my trip is I bought Don's book, Glory to God in the Lowest, and I've been reading it. I've been reading it a little bit, and I'm going to just say, y'all got to get a copy of it. I really love the book. I've only got about halfway through. I was telling Don when I got here. I just got to the place where he passed the Allenby checkpoints to get into Palestine with a friend that he was coming from Cyprus, I think, in the story. But what I really appreciate about the story is just the humility of the faith journey that Don has been on. And you just feel it in the way you write and the words that you scribe, because we're all on a journey. You know, for all of us who are part of a faith community or faith journey, I mean, and each of our stories is unique in that regard, but yours is very unique in the way that you were called into such a prominent role, you know, for the Christian community to be in solidarity with the Palestinians. And I haven't gotten to the places yet of the details of where it unfolds, but I've really been gripped by just your growing up years and the things you went through and the family narrative around how you came through what you've come through. And just really, it's just so authentic. And I really commend it to everybody, first of all. And then the last thing I do want to say as we get into the conversation here is what you were saying about the unjust judge and the widow and grounding ourselves in our faith. Because the thing that happened for me coming back, I was on a trip with activists who were coming from all kinds of different backgrounds. There were about half a dozen Palestinians. Most of them were Muslim. Maybe one or two were Christian background. A number of Jewish folks who were already active with groups like JVP and others. And then other activists who were doing intersectional work. But our conversation on the trip did not have an explicit faith component for our conversations, where our Friends of Wadi Faqeen trips do, because we are a faith community. But the thing that I felt coming back was I've gotten involved in Palestine solidarity because I'm a Christian, because of my faith. It wouldn't have happened otherwise without the network that we have in the Methodist Church to set up the partnership that we have, to be involved in BDS movement through United Methodist Kairos Response. It's been through the church. And I have come back affirming and confirming that that's the ground that I stand on. And that that's also where I find hope. It's such a despairing situation there, and many people were just depressed, you know, as we were leaving. And I was too in a certain way, but I have found that coming back, it's my faith that propels me further into next steps. And it's my faith that inspires me to take another step, even if it's a small step. And so I just want to affirm that with where Don has come from and continues to come from, and that I hope that what we hear in this collective conversation today can be inspiring for all of us to take whatever the next step is on our journey for our involvement with Palestine solidarity.
Thank you, Michael. That was really powerful. And, just truly appreciate your words, but your years of activism and what you will continue to bring to this. Yeah, I do happen to have a few books here, so but thank you. That was an unpaid commercial, and that was a wonderful. I deeply appreciate that endorsement. Well, let's take some questions, and for Michael and I, and anyone else, questions, suggestions.
And let me just say that we do have folks that are watching via live stream via YouTube. We're so glad you're here with us. If you have a question, we know the chat has been disabled, but you're welcome to shoot an email to me. I'll be monitoring my emails as we do Q&A, and then I'll share them. My email is Allison, Allison, at LABC Oakland. That's Lakeshore. That's L as in Lakeshore, A as in Avenue, B as in Baptist, C as in Church, Oakland.org. So Allison at labcoakland.org if you have a question. Allison with 2 L's. And then we'll begin with questions here, but if any come in, I'll let you know.
Okay, great. Please.
And we do have a second.
Thank you for both of you for your talk. I wanted to say that on the idea of armed resistance for Palestinians, I understand that people would feel the need to do that and it's their right to do it. However, the imbalance of power is so great that, and the way the media is we don't get the real story, it's almost, to me, it's futile because so many young people are being killed, and their story doesn't get out, and then more militarization comes down on these villages, and more people are. It just doesn't seem to work. And then the Zionists have, look at these people are armed and they're violent. So it's a difficult story.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Michael. You made some very astute observations on this. But yeah, I mean, that is right. In fact, I think in many cases, Israel provokes the violence deliberately. They do this in the Gaza Strip constantly. They'll go in and kill somebody with drones or whatever, and then there are missiles shot from Gaza, most of which are in protest and never hit anything. But then, they say Gaza started it, and this is what the media covers. So yeah, that's what we're up against. But I think, we have to remember that to take up arms in self-defense is legitimate under international law, as I understand it. Self-defense is legitimate, particularly when you are occupied by a superior power. And then in this fascist system of apartheid that they are under, even more so, I think it is permissible to take up arms to defend yourself. And Palestinians know that, but I know some of these young people feel we've tried everything. We've tried negotiations, and now we have a government, our own government, the Palestinian Authority, is collaborating with the Israeli police and military. We have nothing left. We've tried everything. Others will say, well, we haven't tried nonviolent creative resistance sufficiently. So, I mean, that is another legitimate position. And I just find myself, I don't want to judge any of it. And I just want to take that position. But I affirm the right. It isn't where I will come down, but I will not judge it, and I understand why it's happening. So, Michael, would you like to add? I mean, you already said a few things, but why don't you add to that?
I don't really have a whole lot to add to, except that, to me, if we can have an opinion, but don't let it divide people who are supporters of Palestinians. And I think we shouldn't feed into what the media may say, because the media will focus in on young people with guns, they're violent, kind of like how the media will focus in on young black people in Oakland who have guns, or the young Tongans who have guns in Berkeley, and we have to resist the stereotyping of people, and there's so much to do to unpack and reverse this stereotypical image of Palestinians as terrorists. We've got a lot of work to do on that. And if we get caught in internal sort of Palestinian conversations where we're critiquing them, I think there's a fine line between giving an opinion, but also respecting decisions people have to make. And hopefully then there can be dialogue also with young people, whoever may be involved, because to me it's just about standing together in common resistance. And let me just say something too. In Wadi Fukin, we have a way of resisting. We built a soccer field. We call it a creative resistance. Now we'll get critiqued by other people saying, "Why are you doing that? Why are you building a soccer field? You need to deal with the systemic issues and so forth." But that's what the village has asked us to do. And so when people critique us on that, I say, "Fine, that's your opinion, but this is what we're going to do because that's what the people asked us to do." So,
great illustration, Hassan. Vivian.
Yeah, I've been thinking when people don't have clean water to drink, eventually they die off. When people don't have adequate nutrition, eventually they die. Why aren't we calling what's happening in Gaza genocide? That's what it is.
It is, yeah. Thank you for that. I had that on my list and just didn't get to Gaza. And that's kind of indicator of what we do so often. And that's what Israel wants us to do, to forget about Gaza. The UN said that in 2020, Gaza will be uninhabitable. Now we're in 2022. It's gotten worse in the last 2 years. 98% of the water is undrinkable. They are surrounded by a wall or by the Israeli military. They cannot go out and fish more than a certain level of their own waters. They also have a new gas field that Israel is trying to take that would help them gain revenue, and they may lose that. There's a new book out called A Light in Gaza. It's published by the American Friends Service Committee. It is incredible essays from young Gazans who are brilliant, talking and discussing all kinds of different areas. One of my friends who helped put that together said, you know, Gaza might be the most creative place on the planet because they have been forced to think creatively. They don't get jobs. They are under constant attack. Every other year, Israel tests new weapons on Gaza and then markets them as field tested in all the arms bazaars around the world. So this is a genocidal situation. There's no question about it. We need to use those terms. But I also, get that book if you haven't been up to speed on Gaza. It'll give you a real education about the power and the creativity that is there with young Gazans. But I think solidarity, boy, we need to do a better job of standing with Gaza.
Yeah. I just want to add that for nonviolence is essentially an appeal to the conscience of the oppressor and the conscience of the world.
Yes.
And the reality is that Palestinians have been involved in creative nonviolence for the last 7 years or more. It's not covered by the media. There's nobody paying attention to it. That's why some of them choose to go to violent resistance. And I think we need, like you said, we need to support their choice because they're the struggle. And I'm sure if some young Ukrainian carry arms, the media would call them heroes.
Yes.
If they are kamikaze pilots, they are heroes.
Right.
If I regret that I have one life to give to my country, they are heroes. So I think we need to, make people at least shine light, like you mentioned, about the right to do it, and the fact that they are doing it more because you are less involved, because you are seeing the evil in front of us, we are not doing well, and we are complicit.
Yes.
So that's a message I think people should.
Thank you. That is really spot on. To go back to Gaza, for 2 years, Gazans went out every Friday. It was called the Great March of Return, a nonviolent movement every Friday that went on for 2 years. Israel put snipers along the border, trained military snipers with the latest weapons, shooting in the head or the knee. Innocent people, young people, elderly, who were just out there doing nonviolent protest. And they could, in Gaza, you can walk out to where the fence is, and if you stay, a safe distance, you can look over and you can see maybe where they were driven out, where their family was driven out of villages from Ashkelon and all the villages around there. They can see their land. Ooh. Oh, okay. I wandered out of my safe zone. Okay. Just as Gazans wandered out of the... But anyway, they tried it. They did it every Friday for nearly 2 years. I don't know how many. It's something like 1,800 paid with their lives. And countless wounded. So they may try it again. But they have tried nonviolent resistance many, many times. And it goes way back in Palestinian history, where you can go back to the 1890s, early 1900s, they were practicing nonviolence. So it's nothing new. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Here's one.
I want to thank both of you for coming out here, and talking about Palestinians. So I'm with JVP, and there's so many things I could say. Let's start with HR 2590.
Yeah.
The sense that we get all the time is the Israelis and the Christian Zionists here in the U.S. They have put this narrative out there, and it's almost like we cannot do anything. And I think that in itself is their power to put on this idea that you can't stop us. But I think on the other side, like now in Israel with the elections, you've got these two people who have showed up in the government. It's much easier to convince the Jewish diaspora here in the US of the reality of the fascist ideologies that are in Israel. Now, as far as 2590 is concerned, that's Betty McCollum's bill. I think, I've worked on it with the representative at that time was Al Schroeder. Now they've changed the whole constituency. So Marc de Solinier, he finally agreed to sign it, the last time, which he did. And the way it worked was we had these Zoom conferences, and we brought a Palestinian who was going to school in some part of the country, and it was all over Zoom. And so he made his testimony, and I had a friend of mine whose daughter, who also came on, she's just an American girl, from here in the US, and she talked about this thing, and it really made a difference to these representatives, because there's a lot of other representatives, Barbara Lee, for instance, who we have been working on for a long time, and even though she was one of the few who voted against the Iraq war, now she's it's much harder to have her sign these things. But
She did sign on. Yeah, Margie, you remember Margie and I were there. We went, a small delegation, to her office, and while we were talking to her, underlings, the news came in that she'd signed on.
when was that?
Do you remember, Margie?
This year, okay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
it did.
Because the 2590 has gone through, from the previous congression.
They'll change the number again. in
Yeah.
January.
And like Ro Khanna would say he won't sign it because that he wants to push the two-state solution, and that's the excuse they used,
Yeah, that's normalization,
right.
It's
And
dead.
it's more like excuses.
right?
So anyway, my point is that any little action will just, if everybody did something,
Yeah.
that could make a huge difference.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And boy, we count on JVP. This is a serious, significant moment for you. And I think you're right. The mask is off on Israel. Israel is not a normal country.
No.
And two-state has been dead since Oslo, if not before. So we really need what you have to offer us. But it's a collective thing. We need American Muslims for Palestine. We need the churches. We need Black Lives Matter, the secular movements. We've really got to unify and stand stronger than ever. And don't think the bill is going to get another number in January when the new Congress comes. And some people may pull their names off.
Yep.
I know my wife Linda and I met with a liberal, I won't say who and from where, but he signed on the initial bill. And then when the language was added that Israel is violating international law and could be subject to financial penalty, he pulled his name off and said, well, this could be anti-Semitic. And then I raised the issue with that. We met with this person's chief legislative office and officer, and she was kind of dancing around the real issues. And I said, well, we need to start naming Israel for what it is. And now we have 6 international human rights organizations that have declared it's apartheid, documented clearly. She said, oh no, we could not use that A word. It is anti-Semitic for sure. don't use that. It's a non-starter. All the more reason we need to name it, shine a light on it, and step up our game in terms of using it. And that's why I think this apartheid-free communities is a really important new project. So yeah, so we're going to need to stay on each of our representatives and monitor if they pull their names off the new legislation.
If I could make another comment.
Yeah.
I liked your story about your wife's land in Israel. And I've read in Palestine.
Yeah.
I've read so many times where the US justice system takes other countries, money because some American has been affected.
Yeah.
So I guess, there's also the opportunities of working with the US justice system. I wanted to hear what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, in fact, we have talked to a couple lawyers who have a case right now. And the problem is to get legal standing on a case like that. And they're telling us it's very difficult. But there are, I think, about 200 Palestinians, my wife is one of them, on a legal brief that may take action eventually. We need to find more money for it. But yeah, and the problem, again, is to get standing in some judicial area for something like that. But yeah, we're considering it. Okay. Well, we're hoping to get everybody home in time for the basketball game, but we haven't.
Well, actually, I just have two quick comments in closing. And because you kept mentioning the... go ahead and just turn it off. Because you mentioned... All right, is this working? Okay. Because you mentioned the apartheid-free congregation campaign, and I'm actually on the organizing committee around that, I want to make sure that everyone knows that Kairos Palestine has put together a dossier on Israel apartheid. What is apartheid? What is happening in Palestine? To what extent does what is happening constitute apartheid? What's it called? Spoiler alert, 100%. And particularly because Kairos Palestine is a group of Palestinian Christians writing to the international church, they are saying, here's what churches are being called upon to do in light of what's happening. So I encourage you can find the dossier on the website, kairospalestine.ps, and if you're interested in this congregation in December, there'll be a 3-part Bible study based on this document where we'll be looking at it and discussing it as part of our own movement toward shining the light and then finding ways to take courageous stands to name what is happening in a very public way. So I encourage you to read the dossier on apartheid, and if you're looking for folks to discuss it with, let me know. The last thing that I want to do is I want us to close. There's been a few comments about the power of Palestinian resistance. And it can become very easy for Americans, middle-class Americans, white middle-class US citizens to say, oh, this is such a despairing situation, there's nothing that can be done. Palestinians don't have the luxury of despair. And so I want to end with a quote by the Palestinian organizers of the World Without Walls campaign. Again, they have over 400 organizations internationally following their lead and in support of them. But they offer these hopeful and invitational words to us who might want to be a part of the community of resistance that they are in so many ways leading. They invite us, instead of ceding to the temptation to become completely absorbed in the ever more dramatic and brutal crises and attacks, World Without Walls is the moment in which we lift our heads, see beyond the walls, and perceive the struggles of others and the connections between our struggles in order to gain strength and confidence together. This gaze beyond the walls is the moment when we can see on the horizon a world of justice, freedom, and equality that gives us hope and direction. May the Palestinian invitation to see beyond the walls of apartheid, the walls of injustice and oppression and of genocide, may we see beyond those walls to see the community that is working together to bring those walls down and create an ever wider and ever more inclusive, beloved community.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Michael, and each one of you for coming tonight. And I hope that we've given some inspiration, some ideas, and a call for solidarity. So deeply appreciate you being here. I'll be in the back with a few books to sell, so glad to sign them. So again, thank you all, and for Hassan and Margie for the food. And appreciate wonderful evening. Thank you so much.